Hello, everyone. My name is Mistress Danielle Blunt. I am a professional dominatrix who has around 15 years in the industry. I specialize in psychological domination and so many other things that I'm sure you can check out. And I've been having these really fun conversations with other sex workers, kinksters, and psychologists, people who have knowledge and a breadth of expertise in BDSM topics. And today I'm super stoked to be joined by Charlotte Spice. And Charlotte, I would love if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks. Hello, I'm Charlotte Spice. I am a femdom. I am a sex worker based in New Orleans. I am also a trans woman, and that is a very big part of my brand and my identity. Um, I'm pretty new in comparison. I'm just approaching my kind of like full second year in the industry, and I specialize in a number of different types of kink work, but I think that feminization and transformation, as well as sort of kind of like mommy dom energy is what I'm most interested in at the moment, and then I bring into a lot of my sessions. And I'm so happy to be here with you, Miss
I
Plum.
love that.
Yeah.
I mean, mommy for mommy forever, I feel like is my vibe.
Mhm.
I would love to hear a little bit about like how you how you identify with your dominant persona and like what that dominant persona is. You talked a little bit about mommy dom and being interested in feminization, but like how would you describe your play style and your relationship to your dominance?
Well, I'm an Aries, and so and my birthday is very soon. I've thought a lot about like the chaotic and sort of trickster elements of when I'm feeling most dominant. There is a sort of level of chaos. I think there's some doms who are like all focused. They're like locked in, and there's a really specific plan. They're like type A type doms. Um, one of my favorite doms I've ever known, somebody who like really encouraged me to get into the industry, Miss Bat. I will like shout her out in Minneapolis. It's like very much that, like very type A, has the exact type of neurosis for being a pro dom. Mine is a little different. Mine comes a little bit more from the heart than the brain, and I feel like I channel a lot of that sort of like spontaneous fire energy, um, because that's, I mean, I think a good mother is spontaneous. A good mother like knows how to read a situation and either bring the play element and then switch it over to something a bit more nurturing and bring it back to play. I think about, I think that my dom persona is dynamic in that way, but very much rooted in a like chaos, like trickster element.
Totally.
Yeah.
Let chaos reign is I'm a Leo with a lot of Gemini in my chart, so just like a forest fire, just like
Love to
all
hear.
over the place.
Yeah.
But I also like I remember learning about a dom friend of mine who would for like 4 or 5 years into their career would write out every single thing that they were planning on doing in the scene and like write like a sketch like very type A like 5 minute by 5 minute like breakdown of what would happen, and I'm like, I have no idea. We are both just as surprised
Yeah.
as the other one when I'm going in to a session, because I think there's something in that like there's something with the trickster first, like which is like a mythological like character just like represented in so many different stories and energies that like I just really also relate to that energy. And I think it's like a very specific type of dominance, but I think that there's something so generative about not having a predetermined outcome that allows for that type of transformation that you were also talking about. And like rather than having like, you know, our aim is to transform you into X, Y, or Z, like let's like fuck around and see what happens. And I feel like there's so much more space for potentiality and so much more space for becoming that is less limited when you don't have that outcome, because then anything can happen. And I feel like it's more about what can happen interrelationally between the two of you rather than like imposing that control towards the outcome. And I
Yeah.
think it is a very different style of dominance. But for me, I
Yeah.
think there's like an amount of generative nature in that like trickster energy that I really enjoy.
Yeah. 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 I think like generative in the sense of like we are in like the true sense of like we are playing together. We
Yeah.
are playing together and then we are shaped by that play. And of course, like as a dominant, like I am the one who is leading the charge in terms of what that play looks like, how that is taking shape. But I also like I'm an artist and I don't always know what shape it's going to take, and like we know artists usually, like most artists don't know like what shape, the ones at least that I know who are the most like they're able to just be spontaneous about their work, who I think are some of at least my favorite artists, deeply spontaneous. They're like, you know what, guys, I know I like was supposed to do this thing, but I like really need to make this thing right now. Like, or I need to like work on this project right now. And I like, it's the idea is going to escape me if I don't. Um, and I think, I don't know, maybe part of that came from, I grew up doing theater, I grew up doing theater and like improv and stuff like that. So I feel very comfortable in a space where I am generating things in real time. And I also agree that like I can shape elements of the final outcome, but a lot of the time, like I don't know exactly how the cake is going to get cooked. Like or sometimes people come back to me, or I'll have subs or clients respond in ways that I really did not see coming. Or like
Totally.
they are shaped and changed in a way that I really could not expect, that it was either reaching them at such a deep level that it was opening up some element of them somatically, psychically, um, that I that was not my intention necessarily going in, but through that sort of more creative and generative play, like we found something, beautiful. We found a new space that an environment that we didn't realize was there, perhaps.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's reminding me of, I feel like there's so many conversations that I've been having and having online that BDSM is not therapy, but it can be therapeutic. And hearing you talk about it in this way kind of really reminds me the difference between like the more clinical, controlled approach of like approaching it like a medical session. Like you
mhm.
go, which like honestly I find traumatic. It's like you go in, they like look at a book of things and like it's not based on who you are or like your life experiences or like the complexities of your history. Like very, I'm talking about like very westernized medicine. And it's like, these are my symptoms. And then this is the treatment rather than something like psychoanalysis where like who the fuck knows what's going to come up and then who the fuck knows what your analyst is going to do with that. And so I think that there's, and like I think that happens in like many different professions, but I think that there is this space to um play without having like a predetermined end that has so much more space to allow things to like break through and quite literally like transform. And I know that when you talk about your work, you talk a lot about like the healing potentiality. And I'm thinking about, I think it was Mistress Odette who had a tweet a couple months ago about like the spiritual dom tending to be kind of dangerous. And like I understand where they were coming from with this tweet of like, right, like, and I think my response was like, anyone who calls himself a healer has the potentiality to do harm because like you don't know what someone else is. You can't like be making false promises. But I also am like, I definitely like feel like I fall into that category with my branding of like BDSM being healing. And I remember seeing your response, which I can't remember verbatim what it was, but I think you were talking about how much of healing is like in the West is dominated by like this Western imperial idea of what healing can be,
Yeah.
and completely devoid of like somatics and like spiritual practices that can also cause very real change, and oftentimes more embodied change than what you can do in talk therapy, or what you can do without physical touch, or what you can do with just medication alone. And I'd love to hear a little bit about how that shows up, and if you remember the tweet that I'm talking about at all.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I mean, uh, so I guess like for some context, like I have worked um, in a counseling profession. I have worked in um, like rehab. I have like spent a lot of time like talking to people who are either voluntarily or involuntarily in some sort of substance use disorder treatment facility. Um, and just time and time again, I thought about how these people are reaching a sort of therapeutic wall really quickly.
Yeah.
Like there's and I think it's a low threshold, honestly. Like because so much more of what I think actually helps people cope with trauma or cope with stress. Um, it's all in here. It's all in the body. You know, it's not something you can just think about or talk about. And of course, like, yeah, like we've said, or you were saying, like, talk therapy is a modality. It can be great for people. It can play a really important part of the whole puzzle. Um, but I think that it has been given the sort of ultimate superiority in terms of how we look at healing or transformation, positive transformation. And so I guess like I found myself really, really disappointed by that. It's very, very hard for me to work in a space like that. But I mean, like, it's hard for me to just like deal with that level of dysfunction on a like systemic social level. So
Totally.
like that's a bigger conversation. But yeah, I think that's actually part of what drew me into sex work was this is another piece of the puzzle that I can imagine myself fulfilling. I can imagine myself seeing this as a kind of body work. Do I think it is capital T, the body work? No. Do I think it's like the answer to everyone's problems? No. But I think to discount pro BDSM or sex work as a somatic modality, I think is wrong. I don't think that's true. Um, and so I also believe that providers have the right, the full and unequivocal right to determine whether they will take any of that on. And
Yeah.
like, you know, there's a lot of people who are like, don't call me a healer. Don't do that. Don't project that onto me. So I think that if that's something that you're looking for specifically out of pro BDSM or sex work, hiring providers, like that, know who, like, pay attention to the ads. And I think that a lot of providers will make it clear that that is an aspect of what they are attempting to provide. Um, I try to make it clear that that is something I am comfortable with, like, engaging with. And it feels really true to me. It feels like it's coming from the heart. I think that going the opposite direction, kind of more of the like type A, have my whole script written out, that would feel really unnatural to me. And so for some people, that shit's great. And if that's your speed, book them, you know? But
Totally.
what I'm offering is something, I guess, just a bit more dynamic where the outcome is not as clear. Um,
And yeah, I think there's part of the conversation too that I feel like is that therapy is like an accredited institution that is professionalized in a way that sex work is not that I feel like that comes up too. I remember I was collaborating with Andrea Glick, who's a licensed social worker, and we were writing about BDSM trauma and healing together, and we were like collaborating on this, and it was fun to like bring like the sex worker BDSM perspective as well as like someone who does have more expertise in the or any expertise in like a clinical setting. And so like I could talk about what I saw from my clients and she could talk about what her clients who saw BDSM providers, what she saw in that room. And so I think that worked really well. And I remember someone giving me such a hard time about that, like I shouldn't say I shouldn't be talking about like neuroplasticity, that like I shouldn't be talking about somatics, that like the language that I was using was like too medical for not having like specific letters next to my name. And I'm like, that
Yeah.
is such bullshit. And like it
Mm-hmm.
is so it's
Mm-hmm.
first of all like very classist and just like wrong in so many ways. But I feel like that discounting of like embodied expertise on top of self-learning and self-teaching. I also
Mm-hmm.
do have a degree in psychology. I'm just not a practicing psychologist, but like
Yeah.
that's like beyond the point.
Yeah.
Um yeah. I remember being so infuriated and my therapist friend like just like went off on them about different areas of expertise. And I think like when I was getting my undergrad degree in psychology, I like made a very specific decision that um, I wasn't going to pursue further education in it because I wanted to be touching people, and I thought
Mm-hmm.
that that's where the most impact would be had.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess it just like speaks to that like allegiance to this like dominant accreditation system that
Yeah,
then boils down into like what we think, who we think are allowed to speak on these topics and who are allowed to speak with a sense of like intellectual superiority or whatever. Um, which I think like yeah, like that just ends up promoting the same like imperial capitalist like powers that screw all of us over. And so like I I've lost kind of my I mean I really try to have compassion for that because I think that that's something we are all ingrained to think, and in very material ways it's like insurance covers talk therapy. It doesn't
yeah,
always cover like well it certainly doesn't cover sex work, and
yeah,
it doesn't cover acupuncture, it doesn't cover cupping, it doesn't cover a lot of like eastern bodywork methods, which I have found to be incredibly useful and incredibly successful. I mean that stuff is older than most western medicine and is just as rigorous in terms of its scientific like backbone. um but yeah, I think about how I mean it's you you've been in this industry for 15 years, you know, like if someone were to say you don't know what you're talking about at this point with the amount of lived experience that you've had, with the amount of self-study, with the amount of like communication and collaboration that you do with other people, and then your curiosity, I mean, I think that what does having that licensure give you other than a sort of entrance into this elite class of intellectualism that I think in a lot of ways is once again removed from the kinds of people who would come to us as clients or subs, you know, like this we are it's another like way of removing oneself, and further kind of getting up here when the answers are down
yeah,
here. um
totally. Yeah, I think that the post that I got in trouble for was saying that all that subspace is an altered state of consciousness. And I'm like, it quite literally is. Like,
Literally.
sure, people might have different ideas of what constitute subspace for themselves individually. But I don't think saying that is like a bold scientific claim. And I was so confused because I'm like, okay, subspace is marked by like a different perception of time, a different relationship with your body, things slowing down, maybe memory integration being slightly different, a different form of presence, hyper focus, monotasking. Like you could be slightly out of your body. Like those are
Mm-hmm.
all the signs of being in an altered state of consciousness, like a almost psychedelic experience.
Absolutely.
And I'm like, I'm not saying anything particularly like bold or new, but
Mhm.
apparently because I don't have specific letters next to my name, it means that I can't talk about what my experience is. And I find it so frustrating, especially because I actually do work with therapists, both as clients and as people referring people to me. Um, I had an interview with Psychology Today about like therapeutic elements of BDSM and like a devotional practice and how that can like create therapeutic change.
Yeah.
And I was I was shocked because I really thought that people would come see me like looking for that, and I had like 10 inquiries that week from therapists who were like, that's what I want. And I'm like, all you therapists are fucking perverts. I love it. um but I was kind of surprised by this. And like um but like I've had therapists who refer me patients of theirs who are like, I like this person needs this to happen in their body. And like no matter how much they talk about their repressed fantasies, unless they're like acting out them, like
Wow.
it we can only go so far. And I've actually I had a client's therapist expressed professional jealousy because once he started seeing me, the work that they were doing, they'd been working together for like 10 or 15 years, just like moved so much faster. And so I really like to think about like any like self inquiry practice as like working in tandem with the other things that you're doing and
Mhm.
like figuring out what works for you, because assuming that like everyone needs to be in therapy is the only way to explore the self also feels both like classist when like sure like insurance can cover it, but like most people's insurance isn't going to cover some
Yeah.
like a therapist who has a similar identity as them who can like relate to what their life experience is. And not everyone like speaks as their primary way of communicating. And I think there's also like when you've experienced trauma, talk therapy isn't the most accessible way of like learning how to trust someone is such a huge leap that I think therapy can be largely inaccessible as a starting point for a lot of people. And I feel like I don't hear that talked about enough in the spaces where people are like, oh, you're not a therapist, you're not this. Whereas I think there's so many other places, you know, like maybe someone like does psychedelics and it like cracks something open in them and they're like able to figure out like what their journey should look like and how they want to approach like questions of like getting to know the self and like um I don't know, not like necessarily healing, but like integrating parts and experiences of yourself.
Yeah, yeah. I love that aspect is the integration, synthesis, like synthesizing multiple different avenues of determining like what who am I and what have I got going on and what am I coping with and how do I make sense of all of that in a way that is the least painful.
Yeah.
Um, because I think that, I mean, something that I love about BDSM is that a lot of it is about like pain, right? But I also think that the vast majority of the like mortal coil is finding a balm for pain. That is why people do drugs. That is why they have sex. That is why that like everything is in a search to soothe pain. Um, which is something, I mean, I that's something I take from like drug counseling world. Um, and even when I was
But like
in
BDSM too, in that like I am choosing when I experience this pain and
right,
how, I
right,
think is
deeply
also
consensual. Yeah.
like managing your relationship with pain in a way that a lot of people don't necessarily acknowledge because you're like, oh, you're just seeking like self-harm or you're seeking like pain
No.
in a way. And I think that
Yeah.
there's something so healing about being able to be like, my pain starts now, my pain ends then, and like I'm choosing when I'm doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I think, well, I can't even also help but think about the ways in which, you're talking a lot about how therapy is an inaccessible model to a lot of people. A lot of people are involuntarily detained into therapeutic and
Right.
mental institutions without their desire to do so. And I think about how, not it's therapy is a healing modality, but it is also a wing of a carceral state. It is something that is, um, yeah, it's trying to impose itself as the way, um, and is not the way, like you've said, like for so many different identities. And I think about like myself as a trans person. A lot of trans people want to see a trans provider. They want to see a trans therapist. Do you know how booked up trans therapists usually are? It's like they get in the door and there's a long line already there waiting for them. I think that is maybe something that pro BDSM sex work can really help to like cushion some of that work. Um, Obviously, that's kind of what's happening for you. You were able to help accelerate this level of transformation and integration in this person's therapeutic practice that their therapist could not access for over a decade. Um, I think about like one of my favorite clients specifically wanted to do therapist role play and
Fun.
wanted to do a CNC therapist role play where I was the therapist who was taking advantage of my power over
Mm-hmm.
them, my like state sanctioned and like academically sanctioned power over them, and use them for my own delights. Um, and I think about how this person said he had been carrying this for years, had been carrying this for his almost entire life, this specific fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't do something embodied with that fantasy, if you do not make it manifest in a way that you can touch and you can smell and you can integrate into all of your senses and integrate into the matrix of all of your own self-inquiry, your energy will be blocked. There will be a major blockage of energy that is going to have ramifications on the rest of your life. I've been thinking a
Yeah.
lot more and like learning a lot more about like acupuncture and chi and like the flow of energy and whatnot. And I think about how some of these deeply somatic experiences that people need to have, those are the keys to letting that energy flow again. And then through that, kind of along the same line, that is where you realize like, oh, there's this whole other room in my internal like house that I have never even explored. I've never even had I didn't even know the door was there. Like, and now there's this whole other chamber of potential exploration and delight or fear. It's very psychedelic. Like, and I'm glad that you used that word. Like, it's a very psychedelic um, experience to embody that. And I don't think it's wrong to say that it's psychoactive. I don't think that it's wrong to say that that is a potent and powerful experience. Like sometimes drugs are the thing that helps make people feel like life is potent and powerful, but sometimes our bodies are capable of doing that well on their own.
Totally. And
Yeah.
I feel like when you can hit that state of like when I like fall into a top space and like someone's in a deep subspace, like it does feel like it feels hallucinogenic for me too. And like nothing else exists outside of that space. And like being able to create that container, both I think is like so special because I feel like our lives in the West are so devoid of ritual unless we're like actively trying to create space for that to come in.
Right.
And that like just the structure of a scene having like a beginning, middle, and end is like the same structure that you would set up a ritual and holding that space. Like your phone is off, it is taking place outside of everyday life, and you have carved that space out for yourself. And
Yes.
I feel like it is such a gift to give yourself. And like as someone who's hired sex workers too, like I know that it is. And like it's something that my experiences having hired sex workers is not something I would have ever been able to replicate in interpersonal relationships because I was looking for someone to like hold this like very specific space for, and like sure I could have, but I wanted it to be with someone that I didn't have a pre-existing relationship with because I wanted the space to be held without those pre-existing social ties and obligations. And I think there's something really special about getting to share that with people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's part of why people go to therapy, right? Because you have
Yeah,
this like somebody you can be like, this is what I want out of this situation. This is what I want to talk about. This is, and you are like, that's your job. You are there to facilitate and hold that space for them and talk about the things that like you obviously use your own professional judgment, but to help shape and make suggestions and make reflections on what somebody is coming to you with. But yeah, I think I'm so glad that you talked about devotion, a container, and how those are some of the most potent experiences in human life, I think. And I think a lot of people find them through church and through drugs. And
totally.
so this is just, I mean, there's lots of other ones as well, but I think about how deeply missing ritual and devotion are in a hyper individualist neoliberal society that is increasingly more so every day, is increasingly more dog eat dog, fast paced, every person for themselves, just deeply individualistic.
I was
And,
thinking about that. Sorry, when you were talking about like as if therapy could cure everything, it's like, and you were talking about it taking place like in the body, but I think it all healing also takes place in community, and like therapy will never, or like seeing one specific sex worker will not like replicate the experience of like not needing to move through, not feeling like you need to move through life as an individual and not feeling like alienated from the people around you.
oh my
And I think
God,
that community plays such a huge role in healing that is so missing from like like these kind of like carceral forms of like healing modalities that like when you're talking about people being forced to go to therapy, like that's taking people away from their community, from their existing support systems. And I think that um, both ritual and community are something that like you really, really need to intentionally seek out.
yeah, yeah. I like when I so I'm like I said, like I'm also I'm schooled in counseling, but I decided to not get the acronyms behind my names because I didn't want to wield that kind of power. I just didn't want to do it. Um, but I think about like HIPAA, right? Like you have a responsibility that you have one type of relationship with somebody, and then you must act like they do not exist anywhere outside of that situation. And now, of course, like sex workers do plenty of their own to maintain their own anonymity and like make sure that like, most of them don't befriend their clients or and enter into deep community with a lot of their clients. Um, but it does make me think about how much it would behoove this concept of community and weaving the healing that hiring pro doms or sex workers would lend itself if people were just more honest about
Yeah.
hiring sex workers and hiring providers. If there was just like, you know, I can think of somebody who I saw recently who like their wife knows. They're like, and
I
they're like,
love that.
thing. Like, it's a really good thing that you're doing this because you are like, you have this need that you need to fulfill. It's not a secret. You know, they are
I
very,
don't
like,
want to do it.
I don't want to do it. Like, yeah, exactly. Like, I just, I'd love to move towards a world in which people can speak really plainly about hiring providers and see it as akin to, well, I went to the acupuncturist. Well, I went to, I went to see my therapist. Went for a walk with my friend. Like I went and
That's the new. I went for a
worked out
walk with
on the
my
block.
friend.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's the new healing modality since 2020. Um,
Truly.
uh, yeah, like of course, and so I guess maybe that's something I always want to encourage people, and especially like as somebody who I live as a trans woman. Like this is, I am a trans woman, and there is a lot of fear and insecurity that people feel when they get with a trans woman. Trans misogyny is baked into our society. Um, and I really encourage people, and this is kind of, maybe dovetailing into a conversation about
Yeah.
feminization and sissification. I really encourage them to feel proud of that. I feel to be proud of that attraction and that interest in something that is so unique and dynamic and as like embodied transformation as transness is. And to be, even if you're just attracted to that and you yourself are not trans, but feeling no sense of guilt or shame about wanting to be near that and wanting to be close to that and to be transformed by that in your own way, I think it's very sensible. I mean, maybe I'm biased, but
I love the use of the term sensible. It makes the most logical sense. No, it totally does. And I think I was also thinking of bringing it into conversations around feminization, which I think is something that you talked about. I know, like, in my experience, I've never really done sissification or gender play like with a form of humiliation. And I guess I'm curious what your experience is as a trans person providing feminization to clients. I know that in my experience, because I don't have the humiliation component, like I'll humiliate you for other things or like
right.
or things within that realm, but not for your desire to be like beautiful and feminine in ways that I am. That
Mhm.
doesn't make sense to me. Um,
Yeah.
especially when you're talking about worshiping me. But I've gotten a lot of trans clients or clients who are exploring their gender identity because it wasn't just a like humiliation based fetish
Mhm.
for them.
Yeah, I have a hard line around that. That's a hard limit for me in terms of humiliation based gender stuff. And I will be honest that that does to some degree filter the opposite direction. Like I don't really engage with a lot of like small penis humiliation out
Right.
of respect for like my trans brothers,
Yeah.
Um, and so like, if I get a sense that I could, and that's something I think I actually do want to have a bit harder of a line about. Like I'd have a very hard line around feminization, and that is one where, um, yeah, like I want to be in support of trans men who that hurts their feelings, understandably. Um, and there's other ways to humiliate people. There's just like there's so many other ways to do that, and I think that it just takes some creativity and imagination to.
And it's so much deeper too. It's like there's like people are humiliated by their existence. Like, you don't need to rely
Yeah.
on like these like silly little femdom tropes in order to like make a deep wound that
I
they'll
feel
never
like
get
it's
over.
deeply humiliating. Like I have to just like put this like candy bar on this thing and like hand you this money and like we don't talk or interact with one another. It's just like people have to work in
Yeah.
work jobs. Like this is all so deeply embarrassing. Um but yeah, I won't engage in any sort of humiliation, especially because like from my own lived experience there has been nothing more powerful and life affirming and beautiful than stepping into womanhood. And so, why on earth would I perpetuate misogynistic tropes towards women and
Totally.
sissification? So that's why I don't engage with sissification because I think that
Right. It's like great
inherently,
key term, sissification. We can like add it here, and then the people searching for that can delve a little deeper.
right, exactly. Like, yeah, if I need to put it on a tag or whatever for the sake of
Yeah.
bumping a piece of content, like that makes perfect sense. But you know, when I am really negotiating with a sub or negotiating with someone who's interested in that type of play, I make it very, very clear that feminization is a spiritual and beautiful arc. And you get to witness it in me for real. Like that is like who I am. I chose to live that this way. Um, and you could experience that too. You could taste what it's like to be this special and powerful and beautiful. You know, this it is
Oh.
possible. It is available to you. Um, and I think you know I also encourage cis femdoms who maybe feel even a little bit of trepidation around doing those types of scenes to just refer them to a trans femdom, you know? Like I think that it is going to be more impactful. We are going to be have an easier time with like holding the many like insecurities and fears and worries that people are going to be bringing into those scenes. Um, and we can hold that and I you know if as long as you know it's somebody that's willing to engage in a scene like that, like I know I am really willing to hold um a lot of that fear and be the container because I have been a container for several people who this is the only container that they get that in their lives. You
Mhm.
know, they are, are deeply in the closet, deeply convinced that they could never live like I do. Um, but I think that they stand the greatest chance of changing in their real lives if they interact in this way, if they play in this container and they see what it feels like, and how good it can feel, and how truly like special and wonderful and psychedelic it can feel to change in that way. Um, but it is a beautiful transformation. It is not humiliating whatsoever. I will not like entertain any form of misogyny in my play.
Yeah.
And of course, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like it's such a beautiful and special thing to be invited into that space of transformation and that space of like I do find it so I find people who are interested in being humiliated for being feminized. I find it interesting because you're also oftentimes worshiping a woman in
Mm-hmm.
that space. And like, I usually approach those and like, what do you find so humiliating about this? Like, should I be humiliated about my femininity? Is kind of how I approach humiliation within those sessions as I like turn it into interrogate like a misogyny interrogation scene. I found to be um an approach that works for me. Because I will say that like I do understand the cathartic nature of humiliation and understand that like everyone has limits around what they will and don't, what they want to and not do. And I think I can understand someone wanting to like touch that wound of like the fear that they feel about those desires and the the shame that they might feel, or how they're like going up against like a lifetime of conditioning under patriarchy. And I think there are like creative ways that aren't like leaning into misogynistic tropes to touch that wound and to play with their own humiliation that already exists, right? It's like I feel like so many times it's like I don't need to humiliate you because you're already humiliated by just like sitting here in front of me. So it's like, what do we do with that humiliation is kind of how I approach those sessions, or like with things that like maybe it's not my interest to humiliate you for, but like if you're humiliated by it, your humiliation is already like present with us in the room, um and becomes like one of those like creative forces that can be played with in different ways. And I personally find it much more interesting. Like I I feel like when I film clips, I like I'm just like, all these femdom tropes are so fucking boring. Like, I am so interested in like these niche forms of humiliation that I feel like do so much better for me. But like, I've also, like, I feel a little, I also am like reassessing my feelings around small penis humiliation because I don't really do body based humiliation as like not something I'm particularly interested in. And like, I'm happy to like tell you like what other uses there might be for you and like all the myriad of ways that I can use you, and like talk about the thing that you're insecure about in a way that's not like perpetuating like super fucked up things. But I feel like that's always more interesting. And I think some people do just like want to hear the thing that they fear the most, that like you have a tiny dick, which also there's no value statement there. I want just like want to be like super clear. There's like no value statement there. Or like you want to be a woman. And like, they'll be humiliated. If they are humiliated, they will be humiliated by very simple statements. And I feel like there's so much space to go, and that humiliation becomes so much more interesting when you're unpacking trans misogyny within your like humiliation verbal like sparring repertoire, and like unpacking these like deeply rooted fears that aren't relying on these like very simple femdom tropes, but are actually like undoing you in a way that can cause that type of transformation where you're actually viewing yourself differently. And sure, like I think people are attached to their like humiliation things, and like there will always be like a certain phrase that like works for you and like gets you off, and like I think that's fine. Like I don't think our desires have to be politically correct or like aligned with like how we would like to like move through and like be seen in the world. So I try and find that balance between like desire, like understanding that people's desires won't be politically correct, because won't necessarily be like politically correct, whatever that means, because of the circumstances that we are like raised in, as well as like what my own boundaries are around humiliation play or any type of play.
Yeah. I guess what came up for me when you're talking about that is like I'm willing to play with like the secondary humiliation.
Yeah.
Like I'm willing to play with like, or the kind of self-aware humiliation where it's like I'm humiliated because oh my god, I'm a woman now and I've been a man my whole life. But now I'm aware that I'm humiliated and my mistress or my, whoever is saying, I don't think you should be humiliated for that. That's a silly thing. That's ridiculous. Why would you be humiliated about that? And now they're extra humiliated.
Yeah.
That's the stuff I want to play with. Like that's sort of like the secondary sort of stuff. And I think I can really resonate with what you're talking about, like how these like additional like how many layers of like humiliation are kind of going on when we're talking about something as deeply personal and complex as gender. Like there's so much stuff filtering in and out when it comes to somebody's gender, specifically gender, like beyond it is, which is why I think it can be one of the most potent forms of play, but it's also one of the most delicate forms of play because gender is so personal and in a lot of cases private, you know. And I do also want to echo that part of the reason you go to see a femdom is because you want to do really fucked up shit together that you wouldn't be able, and say really fucked up shit that you would not be able to say outside of that container. And so I think like I am aware of my own tendency, specifically because I live as a trans person around these issues, to make it hard to not see the macro. But I also am a service provider, and so I believe that like there are instances in which I can use those sort of neutral value, neutral statements and say, you have a tiny dick. You want to be a woman, you want to be a sissy or whatever. And I know that like I am not personally contributing to some sort of greater transmisogyny or
Right.
greater transmisandry within that container. But I think that something that I do like to do is in the initial negotiation process is make that stance clear. I do like to clarify that like that is not something that like I support and I believe is worth investigating within yourself. It is worth
Yes.
investigating why you think that is humiliating.
Yes, I think that's the most interesting type of humiliation is like why is like that curiosity.
Yeah, why do you want to feel inferior to some other man with a bigger dick? Why do you want to feel inferior to a trans woman? You know, like what's going on there? And which I mean maybe speaks to the, you know, I have that like open-endedness. Like I'm really curious about what that explodes in your own consciousness, and I do not have a clear direction. I just want to
It's
know
the
more.
chaos from the beginning. It's like very different to be like, you have a tiny dick and now I'll humiliate it for it, or like, why are you so obsessed with this tiny dick? And I did this I did a small penis humiliation session where it just turned into a humiliation session about how he would never be able to please a woman because of his obsession with his genitalia, that
Mm-hmm.
he would rather be humiliated for his genitalia than learn how to please a woman. And like he has every tool at his disposal to actually be able to please a woman. And he is so obsessed with this one thing that he will never please a woman because he'd rather like ruin he like eroticizes ruining sex for himself because he's so obsessed with this part of his body that he won't be able to bring someone else pleasure because he'd rather be humiliated for this. So he's just like so focused on this. And like, I don't know if he loved it, but I did. Like, I don't know if it was he was, but it was definitely different. He like saw me a bunch for quite a long time, and like I was just really curious about it. And I was like, how is this impacting your sex life? Like, how is this impacting like how you move through the world? Like, you are so obsessed with this one thing, and
Right.
that's what I think is humiliating, is like that you can't get past this. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like exploiting the why, I
Yeah,
guess, is like what I feel like we're landing on is like
yeah,
it's not exploiting the what, it's exploiting the why. Like why is this the thing? Why is this the thing you have this neurosis over, this obsession over, that is ultimately the primary barrier to accomplishing your goal, or it's the primary tension around achieving the thing that you want to achieve, but you can't get past it, and you some sick little fucking piece of yourself wants to be humiliated for it and have a lot of attention be brought to that specific thing.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
you want everyone to look at your tiny dick. Like it just
Mhm.
there's there's so much. I feel like the like I I saw I really think that people should be able to do what they want in their sex life and know that like I'm some of it might trigger me. Like I remember
Sure.
someone was doing this cross-dressing scene and posted it was like right during Fosta Sesta, and someone posted like a cross-dressing scene, like, oh well, I guess you can't post an ad anymore, so back to the street with you of like their and I was just like, this is horrifying to me. And
Yeah.
like I was like deeply upset by it, but I'm like, I can imagine that being really cathartic for the worker who was like very distressed about their like working situation during a climate of like radical change. And I remember seeing it online and being like, I do not want to, like, that's not how I'm processing this trauma, but good for you, I guess.
Yeah. Whoa.
But it really, like, I think it was one of the things that it was like, this really upset me, but also, like, um, I can see how playing with those, like, such taboo things could move some, also, like, move, like, I feel like there's this assumption too that like the transformation just occurs in the client and that there's never any like movement within the person holding space for the ritual, which I just don't think is true. And I think sometimes we like many of us will like deny that transformation, but like that seemed for her. um
Like it's I don't delude myself. I mean, I think we're all capable of immense levels of self delusion, but and I think one of the biggest delusions that we have is like we are not impacted by our work.
yeah,
Just like across the board, like that like work is somehow in this like other category of things of life experience that we just are not dynamically affected by, and especially with something as like intimate and personal as sex work, I'm like, how could it not? How could it not? And
yeah,
of course, like that does not discount having boundaries, and that's why it's always important for clients and providers alike to exercise boundaries. Um, but I don't I don't think it's particularly in keeping with like my impression of how humanity operates that we would not be impacted by our clients and that like they would not make some sort of impression on us. What we choose to do with that impression is deeply important. Um, but I feel changed by my clients. I think a lot about the ways in which they've helped me become better at what I'm doing, and I have helped them become better. We've there is a mutuality to what we are doing, um, and I think that's beautiful. I don't think that that discounts my dominance. I don't think that that changes anything about the fact that I am the dominant in that situation. Um, just means that I am responding to this incredibly psychedelic experience that is the work that we do.
yeah. And I think that there's something so like in trying to figure out how to say this, something so present in so much of BDSM culture of like the invulnerability of the dom. And I think I've definitely like in 15 years like gone through like different versions of my like dominant persona and like figured out what works best for me. But I do think that like, you know, some people really don't want to see their dom as vulnerable. And like as a chronically ill dom, like my vulnerability is quite evident a lot of the time if you like are seeing me
Yeah,
regularly or like one form of my vulnerability. And I think so much about the type of submissive that won't allow the dom to be vulnerable, like won't allow the dom to like step down from the pedestal. And I'm like, that's not how I want to be worshipped. Like want to be worshipped for like my flaws and my like humanness and like my entirety, rather than you see me as like woman worship pedestal,
Mhm.
and like, and any person, any woman could like fill that space because your desire is femdom. Like that's less my interest so much as like someone who, and I think that's where the transformation happens, because so much of BDSM is relational, that if you're just fetishizing someone, I think that it's different. I don't want to discount it. I'm also more of into like DS and power exchange than like a specific fetish, but I think fetishes can be transformational, but I also think then when you layer in that element of relationality into it, it becomes so much more potent. Like these aren't just a pair of feet. These are my feet, and these feet will bring you straight to heaven or straight to hell.
Right. Right. Yeah, like, and I feel like a lot of subs who are like really, really specific about they need their dom to not be vulnerable. It's like, I'm sorry, who has control here? Who's the one in power here? Who's the one
Yeah.
making the rules here? Like, you don't decide that for me. Like, I don't you like I am the one, and like, yes, I am going to be seen and you are going to perceive me as a whole and entire human being. You're not going to like do this weird kind of subverted topping from the bottom, like projecting all of your own, what you expect a dom to be. And of course, like there may be providers that are gonna fit that bill a little better than I will. um but that's, I need like relationships in which my full humanity and the thing you are worshiping is fully me. And I think part of that also comes back to the fact that like I am a trans woman. I am so fetishized for my transness, and it is so damn hard for trans women and trans femmes to just be humanized fully in society at large. So like I have a pretty strong demand that that is how I am being read by my subs. Can't read their minds, but I make sure that they prove it in their actions. That you see my beauty in its entirety, and that includes the human aspects of me that are not always in keeping with the like perfectly poised, constantly in stilettos sort of
Yeah,
dom.
oh my God.
Yeah.
I wake up in my stilettos. My nails actually grow up naturally like this.
Yeah, yeah. I came out the
I'm
womb like this. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. I'm curious if you wanted to talk a little bit more about like the fetishization of trans women and your experience in sex work, as well as like how like I can also, or I guess I'm curious if there's like an element of that transformation for you too, of getting to interact with that on your own terms and like with specific clients, and I guess how you interact with clients who are coming to you with that dynamic as a dom, and like playing with that in a way that feels um yeah, I guess like setting boundaries around it, like re-education. How do you approach that fetishization?
Yeah, I it's almost my birthday, and so my like desire to give the most chaotic Aries answer is so strong right now. But I guess
Please feel free. All chaos welcome.
I'll condense it down to being a trans woman is fucking hot. It is really fucking hot, and it is so worth fetishizing, you know, because it is like so incredible, and trans women are fucking beautiful, and I am like so in deep solidarity, especially with all of my other real time sisters who do this work, you know, ones who aren't like, and like, I love all my porn girlies also, but there's something really, really specific about doing real time work, especially real time femdom work as a trans woman or a trans femme. Um, that I like, those are my girls. Like, I will, and like, yeah, I just think like if you even have a passing thought about hiring someone like that, you absolutely should. because we're great. We're goddesses. We were prophets at one point. And but to answer your question, like I recognize that there is inevitably going to be an aspect of fetishization being in this work. There's like nothing I can do about that. That's what I chose to do. What I think is important and how I do that is kind of in keeping with how I run feminization scenes, is that like you will see me and my transness as a huge upgrade to my life. You will see that as something that gave so much value and beauty and meaning to my life that in some cases, if this is the situation, like you will never have, you know, like, and I'm going to humiliate the shit out of you for being a cis loser, you know, that like you're never going to have like this dynamic and like beautiful of an experience in your life. So sometimes I'll play with it that way, that like what I have and what the skin and embodiment that I live in, is just so much more superior to whatever you're going to have. And you would want to try and get in line and kind of, you know, and I will like absolutely, you know, if someone says I'm considering it, I'm like, I will be the first bitch to say like, yep, do it, get on hormones. try it for 3 months, you know, like see how that changes things. If you don't like it, you can stop, and you'll probably no long-term damage that couldn't happen from drinking alcohol or smoking cigarettes would happen. So yeah, I think I really try to just ruthlessly value and take pride in my transness as the kind of defense to any of that, the sort of fetishization that feels nasty. I think in terms of how it works mechanically when I receive inquiries and whatnot, I'll be honest, a lot of it is super simple. You know, it's just really like wanting a chick with a dick. You know, it's like it is truly that simple. And so in a lot of those cases, I feel like the potential for connection and expansion is significantly lessened. And, you know, sometimes people want to be more like fetishists, and that's real. That's part of the work that I do as well. But I really, really admire when people want to go a little deeper, and they want to consider aspects of themselves that are changeable and malleable also, and want to explore that with me. But I also think that being a trans femme like top is unique, and I also like make it like very clear that whether you are trans femme top, trans femme bottom, or reverse, like you are deserving of the same amount of respect. You do not get to cut any corners. If someone is the bottom, you know, like this is just standard practice. And yeah, I feel like I always want to make undue respect be at the top of the line. And if you're going to fetishize me, that's fine, but it's got to be in ways, it's got to be on my terms, I guess, is the way I would say it. Like, you do not get to project any of your weird, like, ooh-woo breedable trans girl shit onto me. Like, there's girls that do that. It's not who I am. And that's not what you're going to get when you book with me. And I try to make that clear.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing on Twitter you tweeting about like a trans femme sex worker support group. And I'm wondering what that is like to have like that kind of like solidarity and community, because I feel like so much of what we're talking about this is having that community to move through life with, and like share resources with, share experiences with. Yeah.
It's been so nice. I am never, ever going to be the bitch who's like, I'm so excited to be in a group chat. They are so so overwhelming, and I like cannot keep up with them. My brain has a really hard time like staying on top of like long continuous threads of information. And I'm also in like 60 signal groups, you know, so I'm complicated, I guess. But it's been wonderful, and I it's something I've been really missing, and something that when I moved here to New Orleans, I also got clicked in with a couple of the other girls here, and there was a real like sense of solidarity between them, and you know, really just wanting to make sure that we all had our needs met, and we're, you know, making our rates similar so that we weren't undercutting anybody. And now I'm in this group of like trans femme real-time workers who are all around the nation, and it's so lovely, you know. It's just nice to sometimes have an echo chamber of just like, yeah, this is like shit that we deal with specifically in this industry, that, you know, regardless of all of that, you know, undying love that I have in my heart for all the cis sex workers who have been there for me and like been supportive of me. Um, yeah, there's just like a level to which they're just never going to be able to like internalize that from their own lived experiences. And so it just feels really, really nice to just be able to share and share resources and care for one another. I think we may have a little like convergence this summer that I'm very excited about. But yeah, it's like I don't want to like it's complicated. Like I don't want to live in a separatist. Like I'm not a separatist. I'm not a gender separatist. I like want, you know, and I believe that trans women have so much more in common with cis women than they do with cis men. And so like I want to be in deep solidarity with all of my sisters. That said, like there are just things that I deal with that cis sex workers don't, and there's things that cis sex workers deal with that I don't deal with, you know, in the same way. And so I think just having reverence for that, and deep like appreciation for that difference, and always attempting to see the similarities and treat those as sacred is important to me. But I love my dolls, you know. I love the dolls, and
Yeah.
we are worth every ounce of love and support. So it feels
Oh
good
yeah.
to have that specifically.
Yeah. I feel like it certainly sounds worth the hassle of being in a group chat. It sounds like an amazing space that's being cultivated.
Never.
Yeah. um, well, thank you so much for chatting with me today. I feel like we covered so much ground and that we could just like keep talking forever. But if people want to find you, how would they go about doing that?
I'm very. I feel like Twitter is still the most active place that I am. Um, I'm on OnlyFans. I'm on Loyal Fans. I have a number of different clip sites. If you go to my Twitter, there's a whole bunch of different links that you can follow down the rabbit hole. But I am based in New Orleans, and I will be in the Gulf South and make it my home for a while. So if you're ever trying to get swampy, I am down here. But I also travel to the East and West Coast and Midwest pretty regularly. So I'm a girl about town.
All
Yeah.
over the place. Amazing. And you can find more of these episodes on my YouTube channel if you Google Mistress Blunt. I don't share socials anymore because I'm constantly getting kicked off of them, but I'm on the internet, all over the internet. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me. This was lovely.
Yeah, thank you so much.